Welcome to Ripstop on the Record, the podcast for makers, by makers, where we talk about all things MYOG. Brought to you by Ripstop by The Roll. I think it's good, right?
Yeah, I think that was a good take.
Hey everyone, welcome back or welcome to the show. I'm Jameson.
And I'm Avery.
In today's episode, we're talking with the GOAT himself, Ryan Campbell. Most likely, you don't know who Ryan is, but after this episode, you absolutely will know his name. Ryan is the man behind the Wandering Goat, a small batch bag maker known for highly customized, thoughtfully designed, and expertly crafted gear. We wanted to talk to Ryan for a lot of reasons. First of all, he's awesome, but we want to know how he makes his homemade gear look so professional, from things like his logos, stitch colors, designs, and more. He makes things himself that look like they were made on a 10-person assembly line. And when we get into it, Ryan will tell you how you can do some of that yourself.
But first, a few updates. If you live in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, West Virginia, Tennessee, or Kentucky, then you need to come see us at Appalachian Trail Days in Damascus, Virginia, upcoming this May 16th through the 18th. The event is so much fun. I look forward to it every year. There's amazing people, good food, gear, really awesome companies, and a lot of smelly hikers. So come in and stop by and say hello to us.
We won't be that smelly, I think. So you can come hang out at our booth, meet other makers, as well as chatting with gear companies. So companies like UGQ, Walhalla, Nashville, and Red Paw will be there. Not to mention, we're giving away a lot of free stuff. So when you sign up, if you come to our booth, well, there'll be a tablet there that you can put your email in. When you sign up, you will get a DIY kit mailed to your door for free. We got special event codes for discounts at these gear companies, as well as entrance into our daily raffles. So giving away stuff like quilts, backpacks, accessories, things like that. And then we'll also have some from Trail Magic for you all as well.
Absolutely. Trail Days is really epic. We hope to see you there. And don't forget to come stop by our booth and say hello. We did get some fan mail recently, and I want to make sure that we answer that question. So I'll go ahead and read that off. Also, when you submit fan mail, I think this is through Buzzsprout, I believe this came through. Yeah. It doesn't tell us who you are. It just says where you're from. So it was sent in, I believe, anonymously, but it says, "Hi. I just listened to the Projector podcast, which was the last episode, and I have somewhat related question. I currently have an old drafting table in my sewing room that's 4x6, and I have a small cutting mat that's about 2x3, but I'm wondering, what do people use for larger areas when using a rotary cutter?"
I looked this up myself because we don't have one of these in the makerspace right now. But there are, so just like you would have a cutting mat that's, 2x2 or 3x3 or something like that, they make enormous versions of those as well. So for example, if you just Google like large cutting mats or full-size cutting mats, or you can even Google a dimension, you'll see a bunch. But one that came up for me was on Uline. It's 60, so like 5x3 feet. That was $180. The key to a lot of these cutting mats and why they can be so expensive is they're self-healing. So they'll kind of smooth over. If you just have a normal PVC mat or something like that, and you cut these holes with your rotary cutter or get these ridges, they'll just kind of tend to stay there. They could impact your material, your measuring, and your cutting. So that's why the self-healing mats can be really nice, but also why they're so expensive. They'll range up to like $300, but they have enormous versions. So oftentimes people will have the entire table be cuttable. That's because they have something like a workbench mat or a self-healing PVC mat, but it's just like 5x5, 6x4, something like that.
Nice. Thanks for that. I hope that helps answer your question. And if anyone else has any questions, you can leave us a comment on Spotify. You can send us fan mail through Buzzsprout. You can send us an email at support. You can send us a DM through Instagram. The options are endless to get in touch. But lastly, you know that feeling when someone asks you where you got your MYOG project you're carrying? It's so affirming because then you know someone you know someone thought it was cool. Similarly, this podcast is sort of like our MYOG project here at Ripstop by the Roll. So reviews, comments, ratings are really helpful for us. Not only does it make our day better, but it also is cool to hear what people really think. If you could take a second to rate the show and let us know, let the platforms know what you think. I think someone recently sent us in a picture of them watching this episode on YouTube while they were sewing. So that was really fun to see. Thank you for sending that in. And yeah, what else, Jameson?
Oh yeah, one more thing. I know we have the sweet studio here that looks really nice and professional, and that's all well and good until the internet just totally falls away. And that's what happened to this episode. So mid episode, you'll notice that my audio and my video kind of change. I had to sprint from the studio into my office to get a different internet connection and then hook up a new microphone. And the quality doesn't really change too much. I've still brought the webcam in here and still brought a microphone. So everything should look and sound just fine. But you'll notice kind of this weird drop off for a minute there. And it's kind of funky as we hop back online. So if you notice that, that's kind of what was going on. Just so you don't think we're too professional over here, know that the internet drops out even in the office. But yeah, that's it. So let's get on to the episode. Ryan, this is super exciting. I have seen The Wandering Goat on Instagram, like I hope everyone has now, and been really infatuated with some of the cool pieces that you add to your gear that make things look really professional. So we're going to get into that in a minute. But first of all, I just want to say thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here.
So we're going to get into the professionalism and how tidy your stuff is, but it obviously didn't all start with amazing logos and wonderful seams. Where did it start for you with a sewing machine?
Honestly, it started a long time ago on hammock forums, which I know a lot of us kind of got our start there. And my dad actually gave me a Hennessy hammock. He used it on a trip down to Honduras. And I went camping in it once and I was like, this is amazing. And then so online search, found hammock forums, found all these guys making their own hammocks, found out longer hammocks were better, make your own tarp. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. So my mother-in-law had a sewing machine. I grabbed it. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I took it to the sew shop by my house, and some of the ladies there who are all into quilting, they just loved that some young guy was, asking about sewing, and they kind of taught me everything I knew.
That's a great story that made me giggle about just thinking of you taking your gear into the shop for all these cute little women to admire. But
Yeah.
It's good to know a little bit more about your background and how you got started. What has it been like going from more of an amateur maker, a hobbyist, to starting a business and turning what you're doing now into the Wandering Goat?
Yeah, that's been crazy. So my first hobby business was actually making hammocks. I called my business at the time Death by Hammock, and so it started out. I made my first hammock, and then my friends were like, "Hey, can you make me one?" It's like, "Yeah, I can make you one." And then it started from there, and then tarps, and then I was like, "Oh, I think I can make a backpack." I did that, and then people were like, "Hey, can you make me a backpack?" And kind of snowballed from there. And then I had a back injury a while ago, and I was cutting the hammock blanks out on the floor, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't get down on the floor. Um, and I had really started getting into bag making at the time. So then I kind of pivoted, and I stopped doing the hammock stuff, and I pivoted towards making bags. And that's kind of how the goat got started. And I think businesses are supposed to make money, and I'm not sure I do, but um, it's been the response has been good. I've been getting a lot of work, and my wait list is pretty long. It's pretty humbling to think people want to buy my stuff. It's cool.
That snowball effect that you just talked about, how you make a backpack and then someone's like, but I want a backpack. Your friend's like, I also need a backpack. How do you, this is something that I've been thinking a lot about with these companies. How do you start to bridge this gap from like, yeah, I'll make a thing or two, and kind of developing your confidence and being like, I'll make you something, but like I shouldn't charge for this yet, to eventually getting to a place where you're like, yes, I can charge people. And where do you set that boundary for people? And they're like, hey, I would love to get something, and you're like, yeah, but this takes me 10 hours to make. Like, I want to give you this thing
Yeah.
too, but I can't snap my fingers. Like, how do you start to like draw that line for people?
Yeah, so especially with what I do now, I do a lot of custom and one-off stuff, and people aren't always prepared for that cost, right? So it always starts with me with just an open dialogue, like, okay, you want this custom one-off bag, no problem. Here's how much time it's going to take me to create the pattern. Here's how long it's going to take me to create a prototype, send it to you. If any changes need to be made, it's got to be sent back, and we're going to do that maybe once or twice. So here's the cost for just that development there, and then kind of move forward from there. That gets a lot of people out of it, right? They don't want that cost. And if that's the case, then I talk to them about patterns that I've made in the past, or some of the really good like Learn MYOG patterns and Stitch Back, and I'm like, I can modify these, and it's a lot cheaper. So sometimes they choose to go that route. But yeah, it's difficult sometimes because it is expensive, and but you know the ladies at the quilt shop actually told me, because quilts are expensive, and they spend a lot of time on them. They're like, your time is worth money, so when you get good enough, you know don't be afraid to charge for that, because you're worth it, and not everybody has a skill.
Yeah, yeah, and that is something a lot of people just don't really think about. I don't want to get on like a weird, maybe not a weird, just I don't want to get a soapbox here because it's not why we're on this episode, but it's something that people just don't always think about, is the time that it takes to sew something. They see a backpack, they see the finished product, and they're like, oh, that's a couple stitches, a couple fabrics, and in an hour you got something. And um, a lot of people get shocked. Like, I made this one pack that I was really happy with, and people ask like, oh, like how long does that take you to make? Like, this thing took me 20 hours. Like, like
Yeah.
you do the math. Like, if I got paid minimum wage, this is an expensive backpack, let alone if you calculate everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the majority of the time isn't actually sewing, it's the planning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What does your prototype process look like? Like, if you were to have a custom project, and you, like, someone says, I want this particular duffel bag or backpack, do you do CAD drawings for them? Do you do sketches? Like, how does that interaction work with them?
I usually do sketches in Illustrator,
Mm,
or sometimes hand-drawn sketches if I'm pressed for time. But and then I use Illustrator to pattern stuff out. I use a projector, and I usually use Tyvek for mock-ups, and that allows me like a really quick way to iterate stuff.
yeah, yeah. That's something I've been learning a lot about myself in the last year, just how, even just sketching it out on pen and paper, how many more mistakes I avoid by sketching things out. Just even if you're not making it for somebody, especially if you're going to be charging, but even on personal gear, I find that I'm able to mitigate the mistakes when I've sketched this out, because I've just realized like, oh, I forgot to think about this panel. I forgot to think about the shape of this one. I didn't think about this piece. And you can help yourself out a lot, like future you, if you actually sketch stuff out fully.
That was a hard lesson for me to learn, because I tend to be kind of chaotic, and I like to just go for a project.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, I've been sewing for about 10 or 12 years, and you just learn like everything goes better if you just take the time to sit down and plan everything out, and just, relax and enjoy the journey.
Sad but true. I totally agree. Okay,
Yeah.
back to the outline a little bit. We're going to deviate a lot, I can already tell, but that's okay. This is already good. Wandering Goat is the name of your company. It's fascinating, and first of all, everyone should go check it out. We will link a website description in the description. Put it on Instagram. Please go look at Ryan what he's got going on there. But Wandering Goat as a name is kind of a cool company name. How'd you end up with that, and what does the name mean?
Well, so it was kind of a brainstorming session. I mean, I love goats. That's like one of my favorite animals. They're kind of wily and chaotic, a little crazy, kind of like me. And so I've always just kind of liked goats. And my mother-in-law actually got me a goat painting from a store that she works at for Christmas one year, and I loved it. We had it up on our wall forever. And when I started transitioning from Death by Hammock into the Wandering Goat, I was like, I really want to incorporate something with a goat. So me and my wife were just kind of sitting on the couch watching TV and throwing names out. And I think it was her. She just threw out Wandering Goat, and I was like, oh, that's it. I like that one. Um, and I actually already had the logo, so it just kind of worked really well.
Yeah, I love that about cottage companies. The names often have such a strong meaning. It's not to say that larger companies have no meaning. I'm not saying there's, it's devoid of purpose or anything, but cottage companies, they're so personal because it's just typically one or a couple of people in the business. And that name has so much intrinsic value. And yours is right in line with that. I love that it's something that means a lot to you. It's kind of this vision of who you are. And it says a lot about who you are. And it's kind of a fun microscope into the company, but also you personally. And I really like that.
Yeah.
So you talk about the custom bags and custom creations that you do. What are some of the most popular or maybe most frequently requested customizations that you've seen?
A lot is color combos.
Hmm.
I get that a lot. I want these three colors or these four colors. I want to add pockets here, water bottle pockets there a lot. Um, for a little while there, I was getting a lot of like people asking for Wu-Tang customizations. They wanted like a Wu-Tang bag with a patch on it and everything, which was pretty funny. And I love Wu-Tang, so it worked
Yeah.
really well. Yeah, but I'd say those are the most popular ones with specifically the color combinations. And that's kind of like, I feel like that's kind of what's been garnering the most attention on my Instagram is the unique color combos.
Nice. Do you have any memorable customer stories or experiences that you can share that have happened with any of your bags?
Yeah. So I made a duffel bag for a friend who does, it's called HEMA, which is like historical European martial arts, which is sword fighting basically. But I think they use other things like swords and daggers and shields and all sorts of crazy stuff. And he wanted a custom bag to carry all that stuff. So I worked with him on that. That was a pretty cool project. My travel bag that I call the GoPa 40, that actually was developed as it was going to be like a one-off project for a father and son trip to Europe, which was pretty cool. And then that ended up just people really liked that one, and my wife was like, "Oh, I want one of those too." So that was a cool one. And then I think the biggest one and one that's definitely kind of blown up is I have a bag called the Nook 35. And that bag was developed with a rock climbing buddy of mine who is for like the last like 7 or 8 years, he's been traveling up into the wilderness of Canada to develop a rock climbing area, clean the holds, build the trails, like all this cool stuff. And he's like, no bag on the market is carrying, is built to carry what I need. Can we sit down and talk? I was like, absolutely. So we sat down and we created this bag I called the Nook 35. We called it the Nook because the bouldering area that he's creating, he called the Nooks. Um, and so it kind of just fit. And yeah, it's a bag built for developing a bouldering area. I mean, there's tons of brush storage. He's carrying like welding brushes and barbecue brushes, and he needed all that stuff protected so that it didn't tear into any of his climbing gear. So we just sat down and created that, and really good feedback. And I've been making those things for like a year now. I'm not sure I'm ever going to stop.
I love that story and stories like that so much. But that's like it's one of my favorite things about cottage companies in general, but especially what you do. That the stories behind the gear that cottage companies make are often just different than the stories you hear about any other gear because they are so specific. Um, that's awesome. I mean, like and in turn, you have helped create this climbing area because of the bag that you made, and even just the idea around like letting somebody say like, hey, I really need this, and making that happen from a philosophical standpoint. I guess it's just a really fun feeling to be like, let me help you create this thing that you don't know where to get.
Yeah, I really like the organic nature of it too. It's not like I'm setting out to create a product that's going to sell well. Like I'm creating
Yeah.
a product that's solving a problem that, someone really needs solved, which I really like. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I need to get up to the Nooks. I haven't been yet, and he's been bugging me to go up there, so I need to.
Yeah. Yeah. So this bag, the Nook 35, it is really cool. I've seen it, probably all your photos on it. I have not scoured your entire Instagram multiple times. Avery has, I haven't, obviously. um, but one of the things that stood out to me, I think first about your bags was the professionalism. How fantastic they look in terms of your branding, the color combos you have, but then also even down to like stitch type, component selections, things like that. You have a really refined aesthetic, and also just like good construction from what I can tell as well. So what we've asked you for this episode is kind of come up with several keys that help make things look more professional for people that are at home that maybe want to make things look a little bit less like new DIY, or a little bit more tidy, more professional. So let's start there. What's the first tip that you have, or maybe before you get to the tips, if you have a disclaimer for how to make DIY gear look more professional?
Yeah, so yeah, disclaimer, I'm not a professional. I'm pretty good at what I do, but I've put in a lot of time. I appreciate the kind words too. But I think the number one thing, and we kind of hit on it already, is plan everything. You really need to plan everything. If you want a professional looking piece of gear, um, it's not going to be the first bag you sew. Um, and that's even with me. I mean, I've sewn, I don't even know, thousands of bags probably. But the first time I do a new pattern, it's never the best. The second, third one, they always end up better. So planning everything, doing prototypes, marking where everything goes, as you're cutting your pattern pieces. Um, one thing I do, especially if you're making your own pattern, is, and this is important if you're on a home machine, try to have strategic seam placement, right? You want to try to reduce bulk. So stagger seams so that you don't have three seams coming into one section, because if you're using Cordura, that's going to be really thick, and that's going to be hard for a home machine to punch through. Um, I try to avoid sewing through foam, and even uh, 3D mesh if you can. And this is, I have an industrial machine now, but even so, I still try to do this with my patterns. That seam around where the back panel meets the gusset on a backpack, that's going to be the bulkiest seam and the hardest seam to sew. It's got all the webbing, it's got all the back panel foam, all of that into it. The less fabric you can have in that seam, the better. And you'll see this on a lot of more professional bags. Is what they do is they avoid sewing through a lot of foam by adding fabric pieces to the bottom or to the edge, so that you're not sewing through, two layers of Cordura, two layers of webbing, another layer of Cordura and the 3D spacer mesh. If you can eliminate some of that, that's that's something that can really help. And then the other thing I think too is like kind of just pay attention to what your bag looks like overall, or whatever your project is. Pay attention to symmetry. I have a photographer friend who taught me about the rule of thirds. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but if you haven't,
Yeah.
look into it, because that can really help just make your design aesthetically pleasing, just by distributing all the different design elements along your front panel, your side panel, or whatever it is. I kind of like naturally did it, but then once he pointed it out to me, I pay way more attention now, and it helps a lot.
I've never made that correlation before. That's a really good idea, though. Like the correlation between um, a like an appealing aesthetic of a bag and the rule of thirds with photography. But it's a really good example, because the rule of thirds isn't just about making things perfectly symmetrical or perfectly even, but it's about kind of creating lines that draw your eyes to the right place. It's about creating
Mhm.
lines that feel appealing or are intriguing even. So your bag doesn't need to be perfectly symmetrical, but maybe there's a diagonal zipper that's going one way, but you're offsetting the weight of this bag by having kind of this separate zipper on the opposing side, so that it feels even. And I like that example because it kind of promotes maybe a weightedness, or even like an asymmetry that can still be appealing on a bag or in a photo.
And what's nice about asymmetry is it's easy to make look good, right? Where
Yeah.
symmetry, if you get something off a little bit, like your eye gets drawn to that, and you're like, oh man, that grow grain tab on that side is a 1/4 inch higher than it is on the other side. I got to
Yeah.
rip this thing apart, you know?
Yeah.
Where if your design is asymmetrical from the start, then you don't have to worry about that as much.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to something you just said about sewing through foam and spacer mesh. I just want to back up that point, that I think that's the way that I've been playing kind of with my own patterns and designs recently, is not taking spacer mesh all the way to the end of a seam. And I think that's it looks
Mhm.
professional. An example of this in the way that I've done it recently is on a back panel, taking that spacer mesh and sort of contouring it so that, let's see, how did I do it? Basically, I took instead of the entire back panel being spacer mesh, I basically made 2 crescents. If you want to picture that for people listening, 2 crescents. I kind of went from the top corners and then curved down to the bottom corners. So that way it kind of followed the shape of a back, because it is a back panel. But also what that meant for me was that most of that back panel seam was just for me what I use 2 10D grid stop sewn into each other instead of all that spacer mesh. And then when I'm binding, I'm not having to worry about binding over spacer mesh and 4 layers of fabric or 3 layers of fabric, but it's mainly just 2 layers of fabric. And I feel like binding, I don't know if you're going to bring this piece up, and I'm not trying to add to your list, but binding is another way that things can look really professional by covering it up, unless you do the binding poorly. And in a really thick seam, the binding can be a pain in the butt. So that's a really, I love that. It's kind of affirming to me, but also I just want to encourage other people to play with that spacer mesh design, like make it contoured, which makes it look good, but then also think about not just embedding it in every seam, because it just makes your seams really annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, binding for sure. I mean, that's on my list. We'll talk about that in a little bit. My second point, I think, is to use high quality materials,
Mm,
right? You could have a great design, but you make it out of the cheap pack cloth that you get from Joann's, and it's not going to look so great in a little while, right? That fabric's not going to hold up as much. The coating's gonna wear off, and then the weave gets loose. So I think high quality fabrics and components make a huge difference. And if you use those, you know, your sewing might be not the best. You might not have the straightest lines, but the high quality appearance might make up for that.
yeah. That reminds me of something I heard recently. I was listening to the Utah State Outdoor, the podcast that the Outdoor and Industrial Product Design Department runs. I don't remember who it was with now. I'm sorry, but somebody worked at Cotopaxi. The point I'm getting to is that he talked about making things that matter and making things that are built somewhat to last, like building things intentionally that aren't supposed to have a short life cycle. And I think goes very much to what you're saying about getting materials, high quality materials, is that even when I make too much stuff. I'm definitely a consumerist when it comes to DIYing stuff. But also, like, I want those things to last. And especially if I'm going to make something for somebody, like, I'm not making it to throw it away. I'm making it because I really want to take it to like the end of its life. And that I'm only allowed to do that because of the good materials that we can buy nowadays. But that's an interesting concept, I think, for DIYers to think about, is like building things to be intentional, to last for a while. And that comes from materials.
Yeah, just don't use your really good materials on your first go around.
Yeah, that's a great call.
Yep. Wait until you've built 3 or 4, and you're like, okay, everything looks great. This is exactly how I want it. All right, it's time for the expensive stuff.
So true. Yeah, no, well put.
And that always helps, kind of nail down your process too. Your just kind of how everything is going to go together on your project. Which kind of brings me to another point. And I think in order to have really good professional quality gear, you got to know how to fix mistakes or avoid them. And repetition with your particular project helps with that. But mistakes are going to happen. So learning to seam rip well is a good skill to know. And I do a lot of basting so that I avoid mistakes and I don't make them in the first place. That can help a lot too. I know a lot of people tend to use clips. For me, I like to just kind of baste. Or I use one of these, a stapler, a lot. That helps me baste really quickly and keeps all my panel pieces in place. And then I just pull them out before I do the final binding.
Interesting. That's a new one.
Yeah. Yeah, I think another thing in order to make your gear look more professional is to be accurate. And for most people, this is going to mean going slow. All right. And this is during cutting, marking, sewing. The more accurate you are, the easier it's going to be to sew your project together. You're not going to have to force seams because maybe your cut is off by 1/4 of an inch, or if you have 2 pattern pieces and they're each off by 1/8 of an inch. Well, there you go. There's 1/4 of an inch, right? So mistakes can compound. So the more accurate you are, the easier your project's going to come together. Using seam guides to sew straight and accurate seam allowances, or even marking them, particularly at corners. I do this a lot at corners, is I just mark exactly where they're going to come together so that I know my needle is going to fall right in that point, and I'll just lift up the fabric to see, oh no, I got to go another stitch forward, hand crank it, 1 more stitch forward, I'm right on that corner, turn, keep going. That's a really, really easy way to do it. I also use a lot of notches to mark my midpoints, so that my panels don't get off when you're sewing a long straight seam. You hold that midpoint and you just kind of go, and when you get to the midpoint, you know that it's accurate, and then you can continue to sew the rest of the seam. When you get to that bottom corner, it's all good. So I think being accurate and going slow, and this can be tough too, because like you want to get to the end of the project, you want to see what it's going to look like, and this is another thing that took me a long time to learn, to just kind of take a deep breath, sew that seam, be accurate, or like I said, mark the seam allowances out before you start so it looks good.
As a kid who was not a good academic and just not very academic in general, I hate to admit this, but I do have to say that I feel like I have used my elementary school math more since starting sewing than ever before. and like understanding pi. That's not elementary school. You know what I mean? Like understanding pi, how to get the circumference of a circle, how to measure circumference in general, making sure like all those things. It really does. It has paid off actually paying attention to the math now instead of just being like, whatever.
Oh man, you're not wrong. You know, when am I ever going to use algebra?
Yeah.
When do I need to know the Pythagorean theorem? Well, you know what? I use them all the time now, you know.
Yeah. Sad but true.
Absolutely. And so moving on, I think, and this is probably the meat and potatoes if you really want to make your stuff look good. It's paying attention to all the details. We talked a little bit earlier about finishing raw edges, binding things. You know, you leave raw edges in your project and it just doesn't look great. Trim all of your threads. I like to trim mine and then also hit them with a lighter, or if you're worried about it, you can get these little thread burner things, and you can use this to thread you just press it and it like heats up and you can boom zap the thread ends. So if you're worried about, you know, if you have a fabric that's heat sensitive or you don't want to burn it, that works really well.
What kind of tool is that?
I think I just got it on Amazon. It's Ecto K. It's just called a thread burner, I think.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
Good to know.
Yeah.
I gotta get one
So
of those.
I use that a lot, or just a lighter. This type of lighter I really like.
Yeah, the long arms are great.
These things are awesome. Yeah.
The Snoop Dogg Martha Stewart special.
Another thing I do with yeah. You know, and not just raw edges of fabrics, but also like webbing, right? If you can hide your webbing ends either in a seam or folding over on itself, that tends to look a lot better than having like a burnt, melted raw edge of webbing. You'll see me do this a lot in my projects too. I use this is a sewing quilting technique, and I'll show you on this bag, but it's called Applique. And so on this bag, you can see I've got the webbing is actually just box stitched to the gusset piece. But then instead of just having it there, I took a little color block and I just folded the edges over and I top stitched it over the webbing. And then I threw a little bit of a little bar tack there just to finish it and make it look nice. That way there's no raw edge of webbing. You don't have to worry about splitting your pattern piece that way. And as long as you're not creating too much bulk for your machine to handle, it's a really good way of hiding those webbing ends, or even just adding like another design element, right? Like a color block, just to kind of make it look nice and professional.
This is another reason that I love to talk to people, that I never realized that technique had a name. It makes sense that it does, but I don't know how to like search on ChatGPT or how to search like what it is called when you like fold over one panel and put it on top of the crook, like. But yeah, I totally know what you mean. I've done that exact thing before or something similar, and it's actually really helpful to kind of have a name for that, patterning especially.
Yeah, that's what they call it in quilting. I think sometimes they'll call them patch pieces too.
Okay.
But like I said, I'm not a professional, but that's just what I've heard them referred to as either a patch piece or applique.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a great technique that, you know, anyone can use to kind of spice up their pattern piece a little bit. Another thing I like to do too is pull tabs, like where zippers terminate. That's a nice little feature you see a lot on professional bags, and a little piece of grosgrain in there. Really easy, doesn't add a whole lot of a bulk. A lot of people like to do top stitching on their seams, and if you use a little thicker thread and a little longer stitch length, that tends to make the top stitching really pop and make it look really nice. And then some people like to do a contrasting thread for their top stitching. I will say, if you're going to do that, make sure you go slow and you're accurate, because any mistake you make with that is gonna show up. So you see, I don't actually do that a whole lot, a little bit here and there, but I try not to, because if you're really trying to make bags a little quicker, like I am sometimes, it doesn't really make sense to sew that slow. But that's kind of a cool method to make your stuff
Yeah,
pop out.
that's the zipper termination is a good point too. There's a lot of fun things you can do with the end of a zipper. Fun is maybe kind of relative, but it's fun to play around with, like adding gutted paracord, some grosgrain, adding a zipper garage, turning it on
Yep.
an angle. I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of things that you can do on that point of a bag just to make it your own, make it interesting, make it look more professional. But you can, add custom colors. You can add, especially with if you include paracord in some way. I mean, there's like thousands of colors of paracord. You can do anything you want.
Yeah, I like to use paracord a lot, and I'll actually I like to pull the core of it out. It makes it a little less thick.
Yeah.
I think it looks a little nicer. And then another cool thing you can do too is use heat shrink tubing. You can get that in multiple colors, and you can use that to, if you only have black cord for your zipper pulls, you can use that to add a little bit of
Yeah.
pop of color. And then, one thing I use a lot is, I use heat transfer vinyl to add my logos. Um, and this is this can be tricky, because for someone who's a home sewist, you're going to need to get something to cut the vinyl, right? A silhouette or a cricket. Um, or if you know someone who does crafting, they can cut them for you. And then with some of the technical fabrics, you got to be careful with putting that heat press stuff on. But once you figure that out, it looks great. It's an awesome kind of cheap way. Well, cheap after the initial expense of buying a $400 silhouette and 50 different colors of vinyl and all that. But it looks really nice. It looks really nice. But also you can get woven labels. You can get patches made. There's tons of Etsy manufacturers that do patches. And with Outdoor Ink, you can print your own labels too, which is kind of cool. All those just to get your own logo on there and make it look professional.
Yeah. Um, Ryan, I'm really keen on the heat transfer vinyl. I've messaged you on Instagram personally just to see how you did that because I was pretty stoked about what that looked like and how that turned out. So I want to ask about that a little bit more. And again, I just need to encourage people to go on your Instagram. If you listen to podcasts while you're driving like me, then at least wait for when you're parked. But go check it out because it just takes the level up so much. I mean, it looks extremely professional. It's not something you see very often, which is probably one of the reasons why I think it stood out to me so much. Is that it is really unique to see this at a cottage scale. But let's talk about that a little bit more. So you upload your logo into Cricut or to the platform. You cut it out with a negative space. You cut that onto heat transfer vinyl, and then you heat press that on. What was the trial and error like? Doing that onto material specifically with UHMWPE that have a pretty low melting point.
It's I always do a test
Yeah.
before, always. Even though I typically have I've got a little cheat sheet with what works for my heat press, and and this is what you have to do. You have to practice.
Yeah.
You're typically going to use a lower heat than what the heat transfer vinyl recommends, but you're going to do it for a longer time, and then you're going to do it multiple times. The other thing that I do is I clean all of the materials with alcohol before, and I let that dry. And then I also preheat the material for about 5 seconds before I put the logo on there. But yeah, there's a lot of trial and error. I've ruined I've, I've ruined a lot of panel pieces, unfortunately. Learning, oh yeah, well, it says it's at 250, but it's probably more like 270 or 280. So I definitely recommend you do a lot of playing around before you do it on your final piece. And every time before I put it on a panel I've cut out, I just take a little scrap of the same fabric and a little piece of the heat transfer, and I just test it out just to make sure that my particular iron, I use like a Amazon brand Vivor, just to make sure that it's at the right temperature and it hasn't gotten too hot. But yeah,
Gotcha.
it's trial and error for that, for sure.
Yeah. Are there any, besides the obvious pros and cons of woven labels, which are the most popular version of doing this, I would imagine, some of I think the common pros and cons, like woven label, it's done, it's taken care of, you just sew it into a seam and you're good to go. They can be pretty expensive. It can be a high cost where you're spending upwards of a couple dollars per label. Are there other pros and cons of heat transfer versus the woven labels that you personally know about?
Woven labels, if you're sewing them into seams, you're kind of limited to where your seams are. Your heat transfer vinyl can go wherever you want, which is kind of nice. You can also scale your logo up or down really easily with the heat transfer, which is nice. So you can have multiple different sizes. You can also add, like, let's say you want on a strap it to say the Wandering Goat. Like, oh, awesome! I'm just gonna build that new logo in my program, print it out, cut it out, and pop it on there. So I feel like the heat transfer vinyl for me is a really easy way to get professional branding done for you know uh, at home. If you're going the woven or printed, you're going to have to anticipate how many different styles and sizes of logo that you're going to want. And yeah, that can get pricey pretty quick, which is, that's what I did before I got the silhouette and cut my own logos. And then still, for some projects, it just makes more sense to have a woven label on there for one reason or another. Certain fabrics just don't take the heat transfer as well, and you just can't do it with everything. So, and that's just experience. Trying to figure out what you can and cannot do at home.
Yeah, I forgot to say this at the top when we started talking about heat transfer vinyl, but what we're referring to for people listening, what this logo looks like for Ryan's, in case you're driving, you can't look at this right now because we don't have photos up on the podcast, is this is what you would typically see from companies where the logo is just like in the middle of a panel, and it's kind of like this almost rubberized or like plastic feeling that is like adhered onto the outside of the material. So you would see it on it's how Arc'teryx does a lot of their logos or something similar. Typically you see this in the center, but wherever it's not sewn in, it's typically a version of a heat transfer vinyl logo. So in Ryan's case, in the Wandering Goat, he'll put like the logo of the goat on the outside of the Nook, or on the shoulder strap it says like Wandering Goat in the letters, or it's not sewn in, it's not on a patch, like the letters are adhered directly to the panel piece or the pattern piece itself. Yeah, I love that, Ryan. It's really cool that you do that. I've been really interested in trying that myself. Just it's kind of a fun thing to play around with. It's kind of the DIY mantra. We want to mess with stuff, I guess. Have you tried getting the stuff pre-cut at like a print shop or something like that yet? Because I could see that being a version if people don't want to buy a Cricut or something like that. Are there other ways to get these pre-cut at all? Do you know?
Yeah, I think you can do, and I haven't messed around with it, but I've kind of been meaning to. But you know how time is. But you can do what they call direct to film transfers. And so instead of cutting it out, they print it directly onto a transfer sheet. And then you would heat press that onto your fabric. I don't know exactly how those adhere to some of the technical fabrics we use, but
Yeah.
I've heard that that's a good route, and you can get I think you can get a lot of different sizes printed on the same sheet really
Okay.
easily. So there's a few different companies that are doing that. I think that's a good way to go if you don't have access to like a Cricut or a Silhouette.
Sure. Sure.
You guys will have to get a Cricut or a Silhouette in your makerspace.
We have one, which is why I've been so interested. I'm like, oh man, all I need to do is
Ah.
figure out how to hijack the heat press down in the print room.
Yeah, it's an addicting thing. You can even cut 1/8 inch foam on it, which is kind of cool.
Wow.
So I've been toying around with cutting like back panel foam and
Yeah.
multiple layers of 1/8 inch foam, and then just laminating them together to get really cool designs and some airflow and stuff. Um,
Yeah. I this is a
yeah,
rabbit hole.
nothing's made it into a product yet.
Avery, I'll head it over to you in a second so that I just stop myself from going down this rabbit hole too much. But I've been in a similar trajectory to you, Ryan, with a couple different things. I've been playing with a lot of fidlock components, so I've been trying to like cut out the
Oh
exact
yeah.
circle for the fidlock snaps to sort through. So I've been actually planning to go send that over to the Cricut today to like get it to cut out the exact circumference of the fidlock snap to like fit the snap piece in, but then also we have like these little like hot knives from Sailrite, just like the old ones, like the handheld hot knives. And I've actually probably going to get cancer from this, but I definitely cut. I was working on a backpack, so I cut like these little slits in the foam that was in the shoulder strap with the hot knife, just kind of like these little slats, just to like let airflow sort through. It smelled horrible, made the whole room kind of like hazy and weird, but it's pretty cool to mess with, and it looks really nice, and it looks really nice under the shoulder strap.
Oh yeah, that's pretty cool. I've used like copper tubing that I've sharpened the
Okay.
edge to cut holes in
Yeah.
shoulder strap foam. Yeah, that can be tedious. So yeah, I was hoping maybe this would save me some time and effort.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, over to you. Sorry.
No, I just want to make sure that we have all of your tips, and I wanted to know if you had any last tips to make your gear look professional.
Yeah, I think one thing that may go without saying, but experience, right? And not just like experience sewing the same project over and over again, but sew as many different types of bags or clothing articles or whatever that you can. And as many different patterns from as many different makers, because they all have a different approach to it, and you may learn a new skill that you could translate into a different project. And especially important for people using home machines. Learn what your machine can and can't handle and plan your project around that. You're just going to have a better time in general, and your project is going to look way more professional if you're not trying to jam a bunch of layers underneath a presser foot that doesn't have the clearance. And I think that's more important for like larger, more complex projects. But just having the experience to know what you can and cannot do on your particular machine is important.
Yeah. That makes a ton of sense. I also like just looking at stuff. Like I'll go to REI and just kind of look like, oh, how did they do this? And I feel like that's a small form of experience is just sort of taking in what other people do. And I mean, I gain so much inspiration even from looking at your packs, just looking at anyone's packs on Instagram, just be like, oh, that's cool. How'd they do that? How would I do that? If I were to pattern that, what would it look like? And especially
Yep.
making other people's patterns, it does wonders for techniques and developing kind of these new ideas.
Yeah, I've learned a lot by repairing friends' backpacks too, like taking those things apart and figuring out, oh, I never thought about doing it that way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I do the same at REI though. Like I'm always taking pictures of packs and like, oh, I want to try that. How'd they get that dart to look like that?
yeah. It's always funny to talk to people because like obviously REI has very like intentional customer service where like within 10 seconds someone's going to come talk to you and they're always like, hey, can I help you? I'm like, no, don't worry about it. Like, oh, you're looking at packs. I'm like, definitely no. No offense, you're just doing your job. I absolutely do not want help right now. I'm really in the middle. Obviously I'm trying to be as nice as possible. Like, oh, like that's a Mountain Hardware pack. I'm like, I really don't need this conversation right now.
I'm in there with my phone camera, like
Yeah,
flipping the backpack inside out, taking pictures of all the seams on the inside, and they're like, "What are you doing?"
yeah. Or they like try to explain. They're like, oh, this is called Dyneema. I'm like, I know you're doing your job, but I know what this is. Like, this is called
I know.
X-Pack. You're like, oh, geez, please.
Oh yeah.
All right, Ryan. So we can see into your shop. So I know we're kind of running low on time, but could you indulge us and everyone listening with telling us a little bit about what machines you have in your shop, and just kind of tell us about some of the fun tools and
Yeah.
stuff that you have in there that you wouldn't mind telling people about?
Yeah. So my main workhorse is a Juki uh, DU1181N. It's a walking foot machine, but not a needle feed. I upgraded the pulley on it. I put a larger pulley to give it a little bit more torque and slow it down. And I originally got this machine because I was doing a mix of hammocks and packs, and the guy at the um, sewing machine store said, we could set this up for doing lightweight, and you're going to be able to get some heavyweight fabrics underneath it too. It's been a great machine. I'll definitely probably upgrade to the what is it, Juki needle feed. um, the model escapes me. I wish they would just give them regular names,
I know.
but
The Thrasher.
yeah. And then I also have a Sailrite Ultra Feed, the LSZ1. I use that mostly just for bar tacks. I just got that a couple months ago. That's an okay machine. The presser foot lift on it wasn't as high as I thought it was going to be, but there's a little hack you can get to get some extra height out of that. And then I use for all my lightweight stuff and linings, I use what is it, a Singer 403A, an older Singer, all metal. It's actually a really nice machine. It makes a great stitch. I also have a Janome just domestic machine that I have set up to do stretch binding only.
Mm.
And then I have a Juki domestic serger. Those are kind of my machines that I use. And then as far as toys go, man, well, I showed you the stapler. This is awesome. Like, I can't. It's just a stapler, but it works great. Seam rippers. I use a slice. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but it's a ceramic blade. It's kind of akin to using a razor blade or a
Okay.
craft knife to cut your seams, but it's got a little bevel to it, so it doesn't catch the fabric as much. It's really cool. You can get that on Amazon. As far as cutting fabric goes, I use this. It's V Vivid. It's called the Best Damn Knife, and it's pretty sweet. What I really like about it is it's got this little knob on the end, and when you tighten it down, it takes all the wiggle out of the razor end, so that it's really precise. There's no movement there. I really do like that. And then as far as marking goes, I use these Soline. They're 0.9 millimeter chalk leads, and they just go in a 0.9 mechanical pencil. And that gives me a really nice, crisp line to mark on. This combo is amazing. It's like my go-to for marking anything. And they make these in different colors too. So I usually have white and yellow on hand. And then mini torch. If you guys don't have one of these are amazing. Cord ends, webbing ends, especially if you're just doing a one-off cut. It's really nice to just quickly hit that. And then the last thing, I got this cool centerline ruler. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these, but the thing with this is the 0 is right in the middle of the ruler. And so if you're really trying, if you're trying to find the middle of something, or you want your design elements to be equally spaced, like you pop this down the midline and oh, that's going to be 4 inches off to that side, and that's going to be 4 inches off to that side. It's really easy to mark. So this is a pretty cool ruler there.
I love
those
that
are
idea.
kind of those are kind of my favorite things to use in the shop, the things I kind of grab for all the time.
Yeah, I love that. It's so fun to hear other people's takes on like those little things, just because it's really helpful. Like the torch, I never thought about that. I have one at my house, but sometimes like webbing and stuff is the lighter just doesn't quite do it, or you have to hold it there for longer. So the torch is perfect. Like that's such a great. For some reason, I haven't thought about bringing that to the shop or vice versa, getting one for the shop to do that. But that's way better than just like holding a lighter there, burning your thumb for 10 seconds trying to get the webbing to like solidify.
Yeah, just don't try to melt those thread ends with that thing.
Yeah. Yeah, good call.
That's a quick way to make your project look less professional.
Yeah. It's aged. It's cool now.
Yeah, it's vintage.
Yeah, exactly. So our last question, Ryan, kind of our signature question for people, is asking what fabric is missing on the market. So what's your take on this question?
Yeah, I was thinking long and hard about this question because I knew it was coming. I've got 2 answers. My first answer would be something that breaks the triad. We always talk about strong, light, and cheap, right? You can have 2, but you can't have all 3. Man, if you guys could come up with something that was strong, light, and cheap, that would be awesome. But that's probably not going to happen. So my second answer is I love Venom mesh. It's an awesome fabric. The look is amazing. I wish it had more stretch. I wish we could get a Venom mesh that had more stretch.
I love that. That's both answers are great. One, because I like number one because it feels like it defies the laws of physics, and I love dreaming, and I want that too.
Yeah.
So and that's what makes me like it. And the second one, you're not the first person to mention that about Venom Mesh, and I know the team's working on it. So I know there's tests in the works, should I say?
That's cool.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, this has been super fun. I love hearing about the inner workings of the Wandering Goat and what you've got going on. Could you tell people where to find you and where they can find your products and anything Wandering Goat?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. I do pretty much everything through Instagram. The handle is _wandering_goat. Actually, I don't even know what it is. I think it's _wandering goat. I gotta look at it. But yeah, I'm sure if you just search the Wandering Goat on Instagram, you'll find it. And then so I do pretty much everything through there. I've had a website in the works, but I don't know. I'm getting cold feet rolling that thing out. Stuck in the cycle of perfectionism, right? But yeah, you can find it's _wandering_goat. There's 2 underscores. Yep. And yeah, just hit me up in the DMs. That's how you get a hold of me.
Yeah. Avery, you have a Wandering Goat exclusive bag. Can you tell the listeners what you think about it and how well it worked out for you on your recent trip?
Yeah, I mean, I think that everything that Ryan mentioned about what he does in his bags holds true for the bag that I got. And it was just really so easy to use, so functional, so thoughtful, so many great little like pockets and zippers I wouldn't have even thought to have put there, but it really just feels like a really high quality bag. You look at it in the photos and you can tell that it's nice, but then you get it in person and you're like, this is so much better than you could have ever expected. But you can tell that just a lot of thoughtfulness really went into the planning and the designs, thinking about seams, bulky seams, offsetting things, like it's all there. So yeah.
I appreciate that. Yeah, you got a cool one. That's a one of a kind. We'll never replicate that.
Yeah, that's my humble brag for the year.
Ryan, we'll do another episode one day about how you do color blocks and how you do that, because that's always something that I'm always really interested in, is how designers and people decide to put certain colors certain places. It just feels like an art and a science. So we'll do that in another episode, because I think we've run all the topics here. But yeah, thanks for joining us today, and please go check out Wandering Goat. But yeah, Ryan, we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.